I thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me to to present whatever I have to say to you. Let me just give you a brief introduction to what I do, because this is a gathering in which I know only maybe a few people, because I come from the discipline of economics, and this is the first time I'm coming to a conference like this. So that's why I need to just give you a brief introduction. Basically, I am I'm an economist who specializes in international trade, development economics, economics of informal sector and corruption. I do a bit of experimental and environmental economics, but these things I don't do much. I am a reluctant participant because my co-authors do it, and so I'm a part of that. Basically, I know very little. I almost know nothing about physics, because I formally was trained in physics last time in 1972 when I was in grade 8, and after that I studied history, Sanskrit, economics and political science and mathematics. And actually, after 22 years since I studied physics formally in my school, I had to give a presentation at the Indian Association of Cultivation of Science in 1994, as far as I can recall. And Professor Bikash Chakraborty of Shah Institute of Nuclear Physics thought that my presentation was worth something, so he actually wrote a joint paper with me, and that was published in Indian Journal of Physics in 1995. And some people say that that was possibly the first paper with the hint of econophysics in this country. So to that extent, I am very much a part of this group, but we know that Bikash knows very well that I am an accidental and reluctant econophysicist. The other part is that exactly after 22 years of that, I have come to a gathering of physicists and econophysicists, because for the last few years I got invitation from the group of organizers here, and I was really scared, and often I said that now I can't come, but actually the idea was that what I will do in the gathering of physicists. But now, why I have changed my mind, there are two reasons. One is that Anindo had invited me to write a paper for European journal, physical journal, special topics, and I wrote an article there. That was one of the reasons that I thought that I would also express my views in front of you. And the other thing is that 22 years passed by since 1995 means that I am actually on the verge of retirement within the next 3-4 years. So whatever I say is not going to have a long-term impact on my reputation. So that's both these reasons that I am here standing in front of you. And actually I'm speaking very freely, because I have very little I won't say that my academic integrity is not at stake, but the whole question is that I'm going to share with you some of my views about this whole idea of econophysics. And I must say that the whole day has been a great learning experience for me. I always had a very high respect for physicists and mathematicians, and today actually I saw that the kind of rigorous work that you are doing in terms of extending your physical intuition, your mathematical abilities to reflect on very important aspects of financial markets and the financial crash and related areas, in fact using large data sets. And I think there are many problems that have the potential to develop into many other interesting aspects. Now, essentially, I would divide my presentation in two parts. I wrote a discursive part, which is about 50% of the PowerPoint presentations, which is about what I feel about what econophysics should be. And I'm very happy to tell you that as I was learning through your contributions, I found that some of my misgivings have been corrected, in the sense that exactly what I thought that econophysics should actually look for topics or research that would be not only falsifiable, but that should be pretty robust, because as you know that economics has now traveled across two different paths. The path which has become very popular, which is of course reflected in Richard Thaler getting Nobel Prize, is the experimental and behavioral economics, which tells you that we take certain phenomena and try to create either an in-house lab kind of an experiment, or a field lab experiment, or a natural experiment. Now, natural experiment is with substantial amount of data, and also data which are available when the phenomenon has occurred and the phenomenon has not occurred. So sometimes these historical events we do not get with a lot of information. But whatever it is, there is a general tendency in economics, the tendency, I mean, there is a wave, it's not only a tendency, that 90% of papers are actually either empirical, and out of which 60 to 70% of papers nowadays have to do some kind of experiment. So this is one good part of it is, yes, the experimental and behavioral economics is actually coming to economics. That pattern of study where you actually use labs and study certain observations come from your ability to have controlled experiment, which economists did not do much 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So there is a change there, but at the same time the problem is one of robustness check, because what you get through an experiment in a particular context is hardly generalized, and to even to generalize with these experiments means the amount of resources that you want is incredible, and usually young researchers have very little access to that resources. So there are clusters of scientific research where certain umbrella organization is probably sponsoring a lot of such research. But at the same time, some economists believe that the robustness, that is the universality of your result, is very important, and the universality of the result makes it takes economics along a path to close proximity to physical natural science. So in the sense that if you get a very interesting results, then you have to see how general it is, and for that you need to work with not context specific information, but with large data sets and so on, and which I think is a tradition that some of you are already doing. Unfortunately, I am not a data person. What I do basically is simple mathematical modeling, which is called in economics some sort of applied economic theory. Now, I always enjoyed doing that because of two reasons. First of all, it allows me to model social behavior in terms of simple mathematical models, which I can communicate to my students, and as well as has some potential for publication. Otherwise, if you don't publish, then you got to perish. Somehow I did not perish, which means that the choice was not bad. The second part of this problem is that data work and anything that is required, statistical information or actually collecting data in India or getting access to data in India is a very difficult proposition. It requires a lot of physical labor, and I'm very reluctant in doing that, so I don't do data. So actually my co-authors are generous, magnanimous. Sometimes they do interesting empirical work. I could sell them my ideas nicely, and they could actually work on it. So I got all the free riding benefits. So basically, in my work, you won't get a single bit of numbers or anything. But I'm going to talk about today is, what I'm going to talk about is that we need to rescue this discipline called economics from the grasp of very well-known scholars who think that economics is an extended version of sociology. I don't believe in that. It's not an extended version of sociology. Economics has its own language, its own principles, and there are certain formulations which are extremely robust and mathematically solid. So basically, the point that I would like to make here is that the further choice of problems that you work on in econophysics have to go beyond, of course, the financial sector. I'm not saying that people are not doing with it, but I'm an intruder here, an outsider, so this is my feeling, that I feel that there must be other areas of economics in which physicists can make a very good, and mathematicians can make very good contribution. But the point is that whatever model that we propose, of course, it has to be robust, at the same time, we should not stop our imagination just because there is not ample data that is available now, because we know that physics or laws of physics or laws of natural science evolved sometimes with people's, very phenomenal imagination levels of outstanding minds. And basically there are certain observations, certain calculations, certain theoretical outcomes, certain mathematical outcomes which then would be tested after 50, 60 odd years, because you did not have data at that time, but when you have data, you know how beautiful these results are. So in a sense, I would also suggest that actually people should have some ideas of, don't sort of, if they have ideas on certain ideas which might be very striking, but information wise they cannot get data to falsify, they should not stop. They should actually write whatever imagination they should have. And in fact, sort of cultivating mathematical models to explain social situation is something which is remarkably, a very productive kind of an effort. The other part that I will tell you is that I'm going to talk about a research that some of my students and actually one of my I won't say students, but he's doing his postdoc with me, but there is also another guy from from the International Monetary Fund. So we are working on something which might be of some interest to the physicist, and let me tell you the story. And actually then I shall give you a sort of sample of a model which itself would look very trivial, but I think the idea is not so trivial, although the working out of it is. Wilfredo Pareto is a big name in economics. It's a big name everywhere, for people who wants to work with welfare, with distribution, with allocation, and so on. In economics, in the first when we are undergraduate students, we learn that Pareto allocations, we should make sure that you are interested in a Pareto efficient allocation. A Pareto efficient allocation is very simple. It tells you that an allocation A is better than an allocation B if in allocation A everybody is as well off as in B, but at least one person is better off in A. So it means that, basically everybody else is happy in the sense that they get the same thing as they were getting before, but one person is getting more. So this situation is better so far as the welfare of the society or welfare or the allocational efficiency is concerned. Now if you read Wikipedia on Pareto, you will find that there is a significant chunk written on Pareto's Pareto criteria, Pareto efficiency, Pareto superiority, etc. And it is categorically said that Pareto was not looking for Pareto criterion is not to reflect on inequality of anything, because you can easily see if I get every benefit and you don't get anything and remain on the same utility level, then of course by Pareto criterion it's a Pareto efficient allocation, but all of you should be unhappy because I have got something and you did not get it. So this is the whole idea of inequality that Pareto was not concerned. But if you go back to Pareto's own writings, you will find that Pareto was worried because I guess the place where he used to stay, 80% of the houses was controlled by 20% of people. So Pareto was worried about the concentration of wealth, and in this case concentration of real estate. Now if we take this as sort of the flashback of a story and we come to the contemporary world with the current events. In 2015, Britain, voted to go out of European Union, and there have been since then many write-ups where it is talked about that in England people were not very happy. Not really in England, they said that England minus London, but anyway, people were not very happy because through their integration with the European Union, they were suffering in all sorts of troubles, and one of them stands out to be inequality. What they are saying is that this kind of economic integration actually increases degree of inequality in the system, and if that is the case, then the Britishers voted against they voted against to be inside of the European Union. Now this relates the phenomenon to a large literature in economics where it is said that globalization actually encourages inequality. And if globalization encourages inequality, then it must be the case that it leads to social agitation, that leads to sort of political unrest, and the British vote to go away from European Union is a vindication, and possibly a very cruel vindication of the fact that people don't like to be globalized. At least the British people don't like to be globalized so far as European Union is concerned. So here is an issue of inequality that is caused by quote-unquote globalization, which in our parlance is essentially some sort of interaction with the rest of the world, and let's call it international trade. Because international trade can happen both in terms of goods and factors of production. So goods and services, resources, and so on. So the question therefore, what we know about international trade or economic growth when we talk about redistribution or the welfare implications of growth and international trade, what really economists know about it, and how economists actually approach this problem. Both growth and international trade talk about that maybe the society as a whole is improving. They're getting, the size of the cake is increasing. But people who are in the society, they are not getting that increment, in a way such that the degree of the distribution or allocation remains relative allocation remains the same. That is, inherently it seems that such expansion, be it growth, be it international trade, that is going to generate inequality. So the question therefore is how to look at inequality at the compensation mechanism of the government, so that what happens is that the governments then compensate. That we have a very common kind of a coinage in international trade. What we say that the winners are going to bribe the losers, which means that if I have gained through trade or growth, the government will tax me and then take the money and give it to those who have not gained. And as the cake has increased in size, so we know that everybody can be made better off, because we can always share this increment. Unfortunately, none of the discussions, literature in economics talks anything about the distribution. We always talk about the absolute welfare of economic agents, but we don't talk about the fact that even if I am getting more today, as my relative position is worsened vis-a-vis you, I don't find myself that I would think myself to be better off, or I don't think myself to be as well off as I was before. So it is not a question of the absolute welfare, absolute income that I have, but it is a question of my relative position in the society. Now there is a reason why I am picking up this problem, because in the entire literature that we study in economics, from microeconomic perspective, from international trade, from economic growth, we are always bombarded with the idea of Pareto efficiency, in which this inequality does not get any explicit space. So we are bogged down by saying, okay, if you are getting $100 before, I'm giving you $101, you be happy. But that is not the case. If that was the case, then the whole question of inequality disturbing the society would not have arisen. So the question therefore is, can we just extend the Pareto's criterion of Pareto efficiency not only in terms of absolute income, but in terms of relative income? This is as simple as that. So we can think of extending Pareto's criterion by saying that Pareto actually meant inequality, or meant that the distribution should not be aggravated, or income distribution should not be disturbed. So Pareto, if he was alive now, if he were alive now, he would have said that let me change the criterion a little bit. I say, okay, when the change has taken place, everybody would be compensated in a way so that the income distribution is not disturbed, so that the relative degree of inequality is not disturbed. There are many interesting theoretical implications of this condition. Those who are from economics or who are aware of economics, there's a very famous theorem called the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. And those who have gone through this box diagram approach, you would know that actually the Pareto allocations are plotted along a contract curve. The contract curve is basically is very simple. You start from a given utility, like say I have 10, you have 10, or income, let's say $10, $10, and then there's something happens in the society in which the income goes up to 25, because to start with it's 10 plus 10, 20, then it goes to 10 plus 10 plus 5, so 25. Then the question is how you allocate this 25. I can get only 10, you can get 15, you can get 10, I can get 15, and anything in between. That is okay, because in anything in between, your 25 is exhausted and everybody is at least as well off as he was before. But interestingly, one of these points, if you look at this curve is called contract curve. And the contract curve has Pareto points which are non-comparable. Of course it is non-comparable. Why? Because my 12 and your 13, or your 12 and my 13 are not comparable. What is comparable is that the total has gone up from 20 to 25. So no economist and no textbook actually goes beyond this, because they said there is this contract curve which basically is the locus of all Pareto efficient allocations, but we don't say anything beyond this, because in some allocations relatively someone would be better off and someone would be worse off, and we'll not make any judgment there. But it is very easy to show that there is a unique point on that contract curve where the relative income remains the same. It's very easy to show. I mean, that is basically what we call strongly Pareto superior point, or the best strongly Pareto superior point, because it's almost like 12, you had 10 upon 10 as your relative income, so it's 12 and a half and 12 and a half. So where basically anyone, either of us, has no potential reason to agitate against the government or anybody by saying, okay, there is more trade, I'm fine, society is better off, okay, there is higher growth, there is higher income, but you have worsened my relative position in the society. This is the case where your distribution does not change. In fact, you can prove under very general conditions that if you have this relative income is kept fixed, then what happens is that there's a large class of inequality measures which will remain intact, which is Gini, which is Lorentz, which is Atkinson's measure, and so on. All these measures will remain intact, provided you do this this redistribution, so that you basically what you do, you scale up and you scale up each element of the vector of initial allocation so that the relative position does not change. Now, why this is an important result? This has many applications, but one of the applications, let me tell you, for which that IMF or International Monetary Fund is interested in such thing, is that think of any country in the world, United States, United Kingdom, India, Ghana, any country in the world, and you look at 2 points of time. You look at, let's say, 2000 and 2010. Now, each year, of course, the government has a prescribed tax and transfer rates. In fact, this data is best in United Kingdom, where you can get income before tax, income after tax, income before transfer, income after transfer, and so on. So in 2000, you find that this was the 100 billion as the income of a country, and the tax rates and transfer rates across deciles or across quintiles or across whatever group you choose, that is given to you. In 2010, your 100 billion has become 120 billion, let's say, or 200 billion. Now you can prescribe a counterfactual tax and transfer rates such that the degree of inequality in 2010 is exactly equal to 2000, which says if the government could actually implement that kind of tax and transfer rule, then inequality will not be disturbed. It does not say that this is the best thing that the government can do. Now, if now you find that the actual tax transfer rates, the distribution is different from this, In fact, there are distance measures how you actually compare these two distributions, two allocations, which I think a gentleman in the morning session has talked about a particular measure of how to have these two measures of two PDFs, distribution function. There are different kinds of measures. So a country whose actual tax transfer rates are very different in the bad way from these tax transfer rates would say that the country has not done enough. So it becomes a part of fiscal policy monitoring index. So it is a part of how you actually evaluate the fiscal performance, the tax transfer performance of the government. So by doing that, so this becomes an application of the distribution neutral tax transfer scheme. Now, then there are other extensions of this work, which if given time probably I'll spend 2 minutes later. But look, why this is relevant to what I suggested by saying, started by saying that econophysics should actually look at results which are extremely robust. What we are trying to, here what we have done is actually devised a kind of an index or an evaluation parameter that is applicable without prejudice, in the sense somebody who believes that this kind of economics, or somebody who comes up and believes in that kind of economics, they would all agree to the fact that actually if we decide on an inequality index, if we decide that okay, we shall go for Lawrence, or we shall go for Gini or Atkinson's index or some other index, and then we can find that the government has done enough to keep that index intact and probably done a little better than that, then we give that government a sort of a better score. And this is very important for world organizations who tries to actually design their policies depending on the fiscal performance of the governments. Now, you can use this. In fact, this particular research, which is the example, will be published as a working paper of the IMF as a part of their fiscal affairs division's policy paper. And there are separate works that will be done, which is, so a group of economists in England is going to apply it to the British data. And of course, there is some work going on with the Indian data. And actually, there are some Australians who are interested to do it for the Australian data, and of course, in the United States. In fact, in the United States, we did an interesting example with the United States, and we found that, we didn't have a very it's a kind of an example. It's not really a very rigorous work, but it shows that the United States should tax the highest income group much more at a much higher rate to keep the distribution intact. So these type of policy conclusions can be drawn provided if this methodology is applied. So in a way, this calls for a kind of since it can be applied to a large number of countries, it's a wider applicability that should be a part of the research. The other part of it is that I think everybody here who is somehow familiar with the Indian scenario or the scenario in the developing world, one term we always hear is called the inclusive growth. The growth has to be inclusive, but the danger of coinages, creating coinages in economics is that we do not back up these coinages. We do not back up this coinage with proper definitions and proper rigorous characterization. So what is inclusive? Inclusive can be like, top 5% should have less and bottom 5% should have more. It can be just in the, below the top people should have a 10% decline, and just, above the lowest they should have a, increase of 15%. So it all depends on how sensitive you are to the cohort of the distribution. On the other hand, what this kind of, as we call, strong Pareto superiority condition allows us to define inclusive growth, or I would possibly be a little more precise by saying non-exclusive growth, which tells you that when everybody's relative position remains the same, that the distribution does not change, I call it non-exclusive growth. It is not really inclusive growth, so it is the difference between greater than equal to 0 or greater than 0 kind of thing. It's the borderline case. But I have a rigorous characterization what is non-exclusive growth, and I can tell you that any growth, added on to that, any growth can be non-exclusive, provided the government is willing to, willing to impose right kind of taxes, willing to implement right kind of transfers. So these are some of the issues that that we are working out. There is a theoretical paper which talks about several types of inequality indices and the kind of tax transfer rules that keep them at a level. And the empirical papers are basically about country studies, country experiments, and etc. So just to conclude, which I have got 2 more minutes, so 2-3 minutes. Just to conclude, I can only sort of suggest that any work that I think this august audience is more than capable of understanding this, but anything that we do in the name of economics into physics or physics into economics is that it has to be extremely robust, given the fact that there is this alternative revolution that is going on in the discipline in the name of experiments, tend to be very micro and very sort of very nano in some sense. I'm using nano in a derogatory way, which I should not, but that's kind of thing. So that I think is very important. Your results should be robust. It should be applicable to policies to some extent. It should help in people understanding these results at a ground level. Otherwise, the purpose of research in economics doesn't actually satisfy the basic requirement. And this is. It was awesome to meet all of you, to get so many great scholars to be here, and I again thank the organizers. Just before I leave, I was sharing this idea with Vikas Da, so I must actually tell this, because the only subject that I have done over longer period than mathematics or physics or economics is music. So I am really very fond of classical musician. I am a classical musician, and the structure of classical music or jazz is something where actually you can talk about some sort of fusion, but with very rigorous care, because otherwise it can turn into confusion. So basically, economics and physics to me is very respectable classical subject. So basically, the structure is such that when you mix them, you got to find a new identity of something. So otherwise, both will devour the content of the new discipline. And the parting remark is that if you probably you don't have to read my papers, but if you buy my CDs from Amazon.com, I'd be very happy. So thank you very much.